There is a specific kind of financial misery that almost nobody sympathizes with, but it is statistically one of the most dangerous places to be. It happens when you look at your bank account, see a deposit for $10,000, and realize that by next Tuesday you will have exactly $400 left. We assume that earning $200,000 a year is the finish line. We think that once you hit that tax bracket, the math just works itself out and you stop worrying about groceries. But the data tells a completely different story. Today, we are going to talk about the rich on paper paradox. We are going to look at why a household in the top 10% of earners can feel just as paycheck to paycheck as someone earning minimum wage, and why that feeling isn't actually a delusion. It's a mathematical certainty if you don't understand the difference between flow and stock. I see this constantly in the comments and forums. Someone posts that they are struggling to save money on a six-figure salary, and they get absolutely roasted. People call them out of touch or bad at math. But here is the thing. You can be incredible at your job, brilliant at generating income, and terrible at building wealth. They are two completely different skill sets. One requires offense, the other requires defense. And in a world where inflation has eaten the bottom line and lifestyle expectations have eaten the top line, the middle is getting squeezed in a way that six-figure earners 50 years ago never had to deal with. If you are earning high but feeling low, you aren't crazy. You are just stuck in the paradox. Before we dissect the anatomy of a broke high earner, do me a favor. If you appreciate having a place where we can talk about money without the hype and without the judgment, go ahead and hit the like button. It helps the algorithm find other people who need to hear this, and it's the best return on investment you'll get on your time today. I've run the numbers on that, trust me. Now, let's look at the reality of the situation. Let's start with a term you might have heard floating around financial news. Henry. It stands for high earner, not rich yet. It's a polite way of describing someone who has a great W-2 but a terrible balance sheet. CNBC recently reported that about 14% of US households earn $200,000 or more. That is a lot of people. But when you poll this group, a massive chunk of them report feeling financially stressed. They don't feel rich. They feel like they are running on a treadmill set to the maximum speed, and if they trip, they fly off the back. This isn't just a feeling. It shows up in the hard data of liabilities. When you look at credit card debt, you would expect high earners to pay it off every month, right? But that is not what is happening. The numbers are honestly shocking. A breakdown of data shows that even among those earning over $300,000, that is, nearly top 1% territory, roughly 60% carry credit card debt. 60%. These are people who could theoretically pay cash for a luxury car, yet they are financing their groceries and dinners out at 18% interest. Goldman Sachs released data showing that about a quarter of workers earning over $100,000 live paycheck to paycheck. As you go up the income ladder to the $300,000 to $500,000 range, that number actually rises to around 40%. Think about that. Nearly half of the people earning $500,000 a year have zero margin for error. If the paycheck stops for 1 month, the lifestyle collapses. If you spend any time on personal finance Reddit threads, you see the human side of this. You see posts from people in high-cost areas, New York, San Francisco, Boston, asking why they feel pinched. They list out their expenses: housing, childcare, taxes, student loans. And usually, the math checks out. They aren't lighting cigars with $100 bills. They are paying $4,000 for rent and $3,000 for daycare, and realizing the math doesn't leave room for savings. It turns out you can earn $250,000 and still be structurally broke if your location and your obligations conspire against you. This leads us to the fundamental misunderstanding that traps so many smart people. You might be thinking, okay, Tom, so they spend too much. Just cut the budget. But if you think lifestyle creep is the only reason these people are broke, you are missing the invisible killer. There is a specific trap built into the tax code and the housing market that hits this exact income demographic harder than anyone else. If you ignore this next part, you can double your salary and actually end up with less free cash flow than you have right now. Let's break down the difference between being loud rich and quiet wealthy. We need to separate two concepts that most people treat as synonyms: income and wealth. Income is a flow. It is the water rushing through the pipe. It is visible, it is exciting, and it is loud. When you get a promotion, you tell your friends. When you get a bonus, you buy a watch. Income is what qualifies you for a mortgage and what gets you the credit card with the metal sound when you drop it on the table. But income has a fatal flaw. It stops the moment you stop. It requires your active participation. If you get sick or burned out or laid off, the income goes to zero immediately. But the bills? The bills stay exactly where they are. This creates a high-pressure environment where you are constantly sprinting just to stay in the same place. Wealth, on the other hand, is the stock. It is the reservoir. It is simply assets minus debts. The tricky part about wealth is that it is quiet. It is boring. Wealth is the money you did not spend. It is the car you didn't buy. It is the first-class ticket you didn't book so that you could max out your 401k. You cannot see someone's wealth when they walk down the street. A guy driving a 10-year-old Toyota might have $2 million in the market, while the guy in the new Range Rover might be 2 months away from bankruptcy. Wealth grows slowly, usually in the background, compounding without you having to clock in. And crucially, wealth reduces pressure. Income creates obligations. Wealth buys freedom. The paradox is that most high earners are addicted to the loud game of income and completely ignore the quiet game of wealth. I read a great essay recently by Strong Yes that framed this perfectly. It said that high income creates a sense of security, but that security is fragile. Real security only comes from the gap, the difference between what comes in and what goes out. If you earn $200,000 and spend $200,000, your gap is zero. You are financially identical to someone earning $20,000 and spending $20,000, except your stress levels are probably higher because you have more to lose. The trap is that high earners lock themselves into fixed costs, private schools, big mortgages, car leases, that require their income to remain high indefinitely. They build a golden cage and then wonder why they don't feel free. So we know the definitions. But definitions don't pay the rent. Let's look at the actual anatomy of a paycheck. I want to show you exactly how $200,000 vanishes. Most people think that kind of money buys a life of luxury. I'm going to show you how it buys a life of anxiety. And warning, if you live in a major city, these numbers are going to trigger some PTSD. Let's open up the cash flow statement. Okay, picture a household earning $200,000 gross. That sounds like a fortune, but the first haircut is the government's. Between federal tax, state tax, FICA, and maybe a local city tax, you are easily losing 30 to 35% right off the top. If you are in California or New York, it's higher. So that $200,000 is actually about $130,000 in spendable cash. That is roughly $10,800 a month. Still good money, right? But now we have to pay for the privilege of working those high-paying jobs, which usually means living in a high-cost area. A decent family home in these zones isn't cheap. A $4,000 mortgage or rent payment is considered standard, sometimes even a bargain. Now we are down to $6,800. Here is where it gets brutal. If you have 2 kids and both parents work, you need childcare. In a major metro, full-time daycare or a nanny share is easily $2,500 to $3,000 a month. I've seen it go higher, but let's be conservative and say $2,500. We are now down to $4,300 remaining. Then there is health insurance. Even with employer coverage, premiums for a family plan plus out-of-pocket costs can average $1,000 a month. We are down to $3,300. And we haven't bought a single grape at the grocery store yet. We haven't put gas in the car. We haven't paid the internet bill or the student loans. You see how fast the wealth evaporates? This isn't luxury spending. This is just the admission price for a middle-class life in a Tier 1 city. The Federal Reserve's recent reports highlight that inflation is the #1 concern across all income levels. Why? Because the price of basics, food, energy, insurance, has surged. If you have a couple of cars, insurance and fuel might be $600. Groceries for a family of 4? Easily $1,200 if you eat healthy. Utilities, phones, internet? Another $400. Suddenly, that $10,000 monthly paycheck has dwindled to a few $100 of discretionary income. This is the rich on paper reality. You have the nice house and the good job title, but your bank account balance at the end of the month looks exactly the same as it did when you were 22. You have zero margin. And that is just the fixed costs. We haven't even touched the psychological warfare that happens in your brain when you start making money. There is a phenomenon called reference group theory that explains why a millionaire can feel poor. And it is probably destroying your ability to save right now. If you don't catch this mental glitch, no amount of raising your income will ever be enough. Let's talk about the Joneses. Lifestyle creep is insidious because it never feels like a splurge. It feels like a correction to the mean. When you are earning $50,000, a Honda Civic feels like a great car. When you earn $250,000 and you pull into a parking lot where every other car is a Tesla, a BMW or a Rivian, suddenly the Honda feels unsafe. It feels old. You convince yourself that upgrading to the $60,000 SUV is just what people like us do. It's the same with housing. You don't move into a mansion, you move into a decent neighbourhood with good schools. But in that neighbourhood, the property taxes are double, the lawn care costs triple, and the peer pressure to renovate the kitchen is constant. CNBC notes that one of the main reasons Henrys don't feel rich is relative comparison. If you are the richest person in a poor neighbourhood, you feel like a king. But high earners usually cluster together. They live in the same zip codes, send their kids to the same schools, and work in the same office parks. Your reference group shifts. You stop comparing yourself to the national average and start comparing yourself to the guy down the hall who just made partner and bought a vacation home. You feel behind, even though you are in the 95th percentile. This psychological distress drives spending. You spend to catch up. You take expensive vacations because everyone else is going to Europe this summer. And that spending eliminates the gap that was supposed to build your wealth. This leads to the concept of golden handcuffs. When you inflate your lifestyle to match your income, you lose your ability to say no. You cannot quit the high-stress job because the mortgage eats 60% of your take-home pay. You cannot take a sabbatical. You cannot pivot to a lower-paying but more fulfilling career. You are trapped by your own success. I've seen people earning massive salaries who are terrified of their boss, purely because they have structured a life that collapses if the direct deposit is even 3 days late. That is not wealth. That is indentured servitude with better upholstery. So, we have the taxes, the fixed costs, and the psychological pressure. But there is one final nail in the coffin for high earners, and it's the one thing that separates the truly wealthy from the high-income broke. It's about how you view debt. Most high earners think they are leveraging their money, but really, they are just mortgaging their future freedom. Let's look at why debt at this level is so much more dangerous than it looks. There is a myth that debt is a tool for the rich. And yes, for billionaires buying companies, leverage is a tool. For a W-2 employee buying a boat or a luxury sedan, debt is an anchor. Investopedia points out that high earners frequently cite debt as their primary source of stress. We aren't just talking about mortgages, we are talking about student loans that hang around for decades. Doctors and lawyers often start their careers with $200,000 in the hole. That monthly payment is a claim on your future income. Every time you finance something, you are selling a piece of your future freedom to a bank. And at high income levels, banks are more than happy to lend you enough rope to hang yourself. Remember that stat about 60% of high earners carrying credit card debt? That happens because cash flow is lumpy. You get a bonus, you pay off the card. Then you have a heavy month. Tuition is due, the car needs tyres, you book a trip, and the balance creeps up again. You tell yourself you'll pay it off next bonus, but then the bonus is smaller than expected, or the tax bill is higher. Suddenly, you are carrying a $20,000 balance at 24% interest. The math of compound interest works against you just as hard as it works for you. You are compounding your poverty while earning a fortune. So, how do we break the paradox? How do you actually become wealthy instead of just looking rich? It starts with a mindset shift. You have to stop looking at your income as your wealth. Income is just raw material. It's like a delivery of lumber to a construction site. If you don't build anything with it, it just rots in the rain. You need to focus on net worth. You need to become obsessed with the gap. The goal isn't to make $300,000 and spend $290,000. The goal is to make $200,000 and spend $100,000. That implies making hard choices. It means opting out of the status game. This isn't about skipping lattes. You cannot latte your way out of a structural deficit. You have to attack the big three: housing, transportation, and taxes. This might mean living in a worse neighbourhood than you can technically afford. It might mean driving a 5-year-old car instead of a new lease. It might mean maxing out every tax-advantaged account, 401k, HSA, 529, before you spend a dime on lifestyle, effectively lowering your taxable income. The strategy is to pay your future self first, automatically, so that the money literally isn't there to be spent. If the money hits your checking account, you will find a way to spend it. If it's diverted to investments before you see it, you learn to live on the rest. Ultimately, you have to redefine what safety feels like. Safety isn't a high credit limit. Safety is a paid-off house. Safety is a year's worth of expenses in a high-yield savings account. Safety is knowing that if you walked into your boss's office and quit today, you wouldn't lose your home. That feeling is worth infinitely more than a luxury car or a private club membership. When you start valuing freedom over status, the paradox dissolves. You stop caring about the Henrys next door and start caring about your own balance sheet. The rich on paper paradox is real, and it is trapping millions of high-achieving people in a cycle of high-stress mediocrity. But it is a trap with an open door. You just have to be willing to walk through it, which usually means looking less successful than you are for a few years, so you can actually be successful for the rest of your life. It's about being quiet rich instead of loud.